I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ is in Prague for the IIHF World Championships. I definitely want to hear about your time at the Austria-Canada game, which was wild. We're going to get to that, but we should talk about the NHL playoffs first. Specifically, let's start with Vancouver and Elias Pettersson and the press conference he had earlier this week. He did not look like he was having a good time. It's not been a great postseason for the Swedish forward, 4 points in 10 games. The one goal he scored, it did come in the series he's in right now, but that's the only point he's had in this series. What did you think of that press conference? And what did you think of the criticism surrounding the Swedish forward?
Well, it's been a lot, right? And you can see he's wearing it in terms of, it's almost like he said enough with his words, but the body language is what tells you everything when you're watching the video of Pettersson up there. And it's funny, I was having a conversation with someone who works for an NHL team, not related to the Canucks or Pettersson in particular, but he was just saying he thinks in today's day and age, the criticism on players that either the points don't fall for them or go through a tough time, or maybe playing through injuries, or maybe it's the line mates. He said he doesn't think it's ever been this bad. And he was pointing to a guy like Pettersson, what he's endured. He mentioned David Pastrnak and some of the heat he's taken at times during these playoffs. Obviously, he had a big moment with the Game 7 overtime goal in round one. But, beyond that, he certainly had some of his own ups and downs. And the point this NHL executive, we'll call him, was making is like, I don't blame players for taking every buck that they can when it comes time to negotiate a contract, because there's a lot that comes with the territory. And I think some of it is a social media world. By no means am I introducing this, by the way, to say Pettersson doesn't deserve some criticism or some questions about his play. I think that, he signed an extension, speaking of contracts this year, $11.6 million that kicks in for next year, 8-year deal. He's paid as one of the best players in the league. And so far, at least by his production, he's not performing to that level. And at a time when you have Rick Tocchet saying, we've got 5 or 6 passengers in the series. It doesn't take a genius sitting here in Czechia to connect some dots about, who he might be pointing at as one of the people that he's referencing with that comment. And so, I just thought it was interesting because I do think players, you look back on Mitch Marner in the first round with Toronto. The invisible man cover on the Toronto Sun came with the series tied 1-1. Even in the case of Pettersson, he's taken all this heat. The Canucks are up 2-1 in this series. It's 2-2 right now, heading into, as we're recording this before Game 5. And so, it's just amazing. These guys, they're getting blasted before anything bad's really happened to their team yet. And Pettersson in particular, I heard pretty recently that he's not injured. That of course could change. We know the nature of these games. Any shift or any individual game, maybe he's picked something up. But I think really it's a case of a player who's truly struggling. Hasn't been placed in a spot in the lineup where he's been in the past to be productive. And let's face it, it's just harder to produce goals and points at this time of year. And if you're counted on to do that, it's not a comfortable spot sitting at that podium.
It doesn't help for guys like Pettersson and Pastrnak that they play in big media markets as well. Right. Vancouver, we've basically heard throughout this entire series how the fans can be, and of course the media also as well, in terms of their coverage and a bit of the intensity that they provide too. They're great in Vancouver, by the way. This is not shade at them. Just for a guy like Pettersson, with the money he's due to make and the production he's shown in the playoffs, of course he's going to get that type of attention.
Yeah, there's nowhere to hide, right? Everybody gets a stat sheet before the game. Everyone can see, the fact that you pointed out in your first question, he's got 1 goal in the playoffs. And as they're getting deeper into the second round, it's tougher and tougher to ignore that stat, especially at a time when maybe they've had some trouble in some games producing offense. Obviously, all the games in the first 4 against Edmonton have been 1-goal games. So every, just by extension of that, every single goal is important because there's not been a whole lot between the teams to choose from. You've also got, you've had 2 goaltenders in this series that we wouldn't necessarily expected to be there, especially with Pickard getting the last start for Edmonton. Obviously, Artur Silov's the Canucks number 3, carrying the mail since, early in the first round for them. Every goal is massive and magnified, and there just haven't been enough coming off Pettersson's stick. And I just find it interesting because, again, this is one of 8 teams remaining playing. This is one of the better players in the world. I mean, I certainly wouldn't bet against Pettersson long term, but where the playoffs create this pressure point is the Canucks have potentially as few as 2 games left. Obviously could end up playing for another month or more if they can get through to the Stanley Cup final. But you don't always have time to find your footing, I guess, if you're in his spot. And as much pressure as he's maybe feeling from the outside, on the inside, it's got to be eating him up. I mean, I think that's why he was almost despondent at times in that press conference. He acknowledging, he's been struggling, not even just in the playoffs. Even if you go back to the last stretch of regular season, he's like, didn't seem to have any answers, or at least any he was willing to share at that point in time. And so the Stanley Cup has never, ever been easy to win, but it just feels in some ways it almost gets harder because the point of scrutiny on the top players and those teams with the big followings it's outrageous. It's crazy. And I don't see that changing. This, as I said, this isn't a call to say don't criticize Pettersson. It's just more acknowledging that 10 years ago, even someone in his position probably wouldn't be feeling it quite to the same degree that he is today.
That's a fair point. And I'm glad you mentioned that at the end. We're not saying that a player like Pettersson shouldn't be criticized with the production that he's shown, but a lot of people watched that press conference and felt it was a tough watch. We were talking about it in the CJ Show group chat. And Adam Wilde chimed in and was like, he stops watching after about a minute or two because of how awkward and weird it was just seeing Elias Pettersson in that spot. He just looked really uncomfortable. That's what made it really weird to watch.
Well, you can identify with him on a human level. Now, if you're an Oilers fan, maybe you watch that with a human level going like, this is great because this could be one of the guys that could bury us. And he doesn't seem to have it right now. So, you might find a little positive in it if you're really invested in the outcome of the series. But for those of us from afar that, obviously I'm not cheering for either team. I'm just watching and enjoying like anyone else right now. I mean, it's hard not to feel something. The joy of the game is not emanating through him right now because of that pressure, because of his expectations for himself, the expectations the coach has, the GM and management have, the fans have, and it's just not there. And, going into game 5, I mean, look, I always think the good thing if you're a player in his spot is there are a number of guys over the years, whether it's even Jonathan Marchessault last year, didn't get scoring until the second round, and he ended up with 12 or 13 playoff goals and won the Conn Smythe Trophy. So, it can reverse and you can get on a hot streak and do something memorable that'll be talked about forever. But right now it's going all in the wrong direction for him. And, it just feels like some of the heat that the Toronto guys have taken at times, Pasternak maybe to a slightly lesser extent in these playoffs. And it's a grinder, man. The playoff crucible is real.
Fearless prediction: Elias Pettersson will score a goal for the Vancouver Canucks in Game 5.
Whoa, I like that.
Fearless prediction. And David,
who's he going to score it against? Who's going to be in net?
Ooh, that is a good question. That is a good question. I mean,
this will be dated by the time you're listening. Sorry, dear listener, but
absolutely, for sure. But like, the Oilers won with Calvin Pickard in net. Do you not ride the hot hand?
I would be going back.
Am I wrong?
I would be going back to Stuart Skinner.
I'd go back to Calvin Pickard. So you go back to Skinner. I say at this point, I get it. Skinner's your guy, but it's the playoffs. You're trying to get wins, and Skinner has not been that guy in this series. Why not go back to Calvin Pickard?
Well, for me, it's just because he didn't have to steal the game. He did everything he needed to get the win. I'm not grading. You're not grading victories at this time of year too closely, but I just feel that Skinner played 59 games in the regular season. You're kind of living and dying with him. You can count on Pickard here and there, but I don't see Pickard getting they need 10 more wins to win the Stanley Cup. I just think that would be a big ask for him to have to take over the reins because he hasn't played a string of games in a long time. It's really nothing against him. I just think the ultimate success of the Oilers this season is probably hinging on what Stuart Skinner can give you. You gave him a night off. You let him get a breath. It's now been a few days to clear his head and maybe rest up and all those things. I'd go back to him because ultimately I think you need him at his best to have a chance to keep this run going.
You might be right. I just think in the playoffs, we've seen it so many times before where teams will just ride the hot hand. And we mentioned it earlier in the week that the save percentage for Stuart Skinner was not good in this series against Vancouver. And you're right. This series could hinge on how successful Stuart Skinner is. And if he's not playing that well, maybe it's just worth giving him that time off for game 5 and going with the guy who got you a win. I get he didn't exert himself too much in that victory over Vancouver, but he still got the win. And at the end of the day, whoever it's, you don't need the goalie. You need a goalie to get you through the playoffs. And maybe Calvin Pickard is that guy for right now. It doesn't mean they can't go back to Stuart Skinner, but I think you ride the hot hand. You stick with the guy who won the last game.
I would look at it and go like, what are the odds of him getting you another win? And again, I'm not trying to tear him down. It's just he's a journeyman goaltender, right? And sometimes teams do what you're seeing, like with Seelobs, who's just he's 23. He's had success at last year's World Hockey Championship, actually, for Latvia. Like he's sort of a goalie of the future. And so sometimes you take a bit of a gamble with that player because you believe it's in them to eventually be the sort of player that can carry your team. And, many, many moons ago, we saw this with Cam Ward in Carolina in a year where he really hadn't established himself yet. Didn't start that playoffs in 2006 as Carolina starter, but ultimately played most of the important games right up until they won a Stanley Cup. And so it's one thing to go to the young guy in your organization with lots of sort of ability, but you're just not sure how it's all going to turn out. And another with Calvin Pickard, where, again, very serviceable career, but he's been on what? I think he said 12 teams. I didn't count up to see if he was being literal with that, but he certainly bounced around a lot through the American Hockey League and some different NHL organizations. And he kind of is what he is. And I'd be tough for me to even imagine him winning 2 of the next 3 if you said you were going to start the rest of the series with him, let alone even just getting a game 5 win.
I don't think it's 12 teams. I want to say it's 5 or 6, maybe 5 for Calvin, but drafted by Colorado. There's another team in there I'm probably missing. But one
Vegas,
part of his story that I think
he got traded to Toronto. He played a game in Toronto. He played in Philly off of
Yes.
waivers.
Yes. Detroit, I think, is in there too. Vegas, I saw this yesterday. I don't know if you realize this, but he got picked by Vegas in the expansion draft. And just like about a month before training camp, he puts out this video on Twitter where he's asking Vegas fans to help pick a design for his mask, and then gets traded before he ever plays a game. He gets waived and then gets traded before he ever plays a game. I thought that was like a wild circumstance for Calvin Pickard.
Dude, it's a tough business, isn't it? I mean, we talk, him and Pettersson are at opposite ends kind of the food chain in a sense, but I mean, they both experience a lot of challenges. I mean, there's something to be said for just keeping on and doing your thing and persevering. And that's the other side of the story that I haven't highlighted is how cool is it he gets it in game 4 and gets them a win and gets that recognition and all that love, because obviously he's put a lot of work in to be in this stage of his career. And, he was asked the question. I know some people were snorting at it, but he had every reason to wonder if he'd ever get a playoff start. That's a hard thing to come by because he hasn't had a secure NHL job too often. And then obviously you have to be on a team good enough to be in the playoffs and to give you that start.
From Colorado, Detroit, Toronto, Philadelphia, Arizona, Edmonton. And then he never played for Vegas, but he was a part of Vegas. And now he finds himself as a discussion topic in the Stanley Cup playoffs. What a world we live in.
It's been a year for goaltending, right? I mean, who predicted Hellebuck coming off his season would sort of come undone in round 1 to the degree he did? Now we have these sort of unlikely starters already in the second round. I mean, the goalie position is not getting any more stable around the league. I mean, there's still the odd superstar out there, but otherwise it's hit and miss in a lot of places, even on very good teams.
Absolutely. I have a fun one for you next.
Mm-hmm.
We have a handful of teams who find themselves down in their series and are trying to mount comebacks. The Boston Bruins still alive against the Florida Panthers, down 3-2. Colorado won on Wednesday night. What a game over there, by the way, against Dallas. They're trying to come back. In Carolina, they were down 3-0, and they're trying to become the 5th team to come back from a 3-0 series deficit. Which of these 3 teams down 3-2 right now do you think has the best chance at coming back and winning this thing in 7?
Call me crazy, but I think it's the Hurricanes, and
ooh, I like it.
The interesting thing with that, of course, is they were down 3-0, and as you highlight, history does not reflect kindly on a team to come back from that. But, they've already got 2 of those wins to extend the season twice. they've planted a little bit more doubt, I would suspect, in their opponents' minds in doing so. And they're facing Game 6 at home, a place where it's very loud to play. And, it's tough to go on the road and win a Game 7 should they force one at Madison Square Garden. But, I just think that team, the core of it has been through a lot of playoff battles now. They were in the Eastern Conference Finals recently as last year. Some question marks with their goaltending. They went back to Freddie Anderson. He had a nice Game 5 to extend out the series. But, I feel that they're probably best positioned to do it. Florida has looked very strong when they're on their game this playoffs. Credit to Boston winning a game without Brad Marchand to keep their season alive. But I think that's going to be a tough one for them. And Colorado just down Nichushkin and some of the other situations they're managing as a team. I think Dallas is going to be able to finish that one off. But if there's one that has me thinking it's possible, I'm looking at the Hurricanes to shock the world against the President's Trophy winners.
The Hurricanes one would be more fun because it's only happened so many times where a team has come back from down 3-0. I would think Colorado might have the best chance, just considering how well they're just built and just the elite talent they have up front that could will them to be in a position where they could come back from 7. You did mention the Valeri Nichushkin thing, which I'm curious what you thought about the way the Avalanche players responded to that. Nichushkin admitted to stage 3 of the NHLPA Players Assistance Program earlier this week. But I thought there were some really interesting comments from guys like Cale Makar and Jack Johnson in light of what happened.
Sure, and I think you see a little frustration, or I hear a little frustration, particularly in Jack Johnson's answer about him making his decisions. And that's reflective. Look, where Jack Johnson's at his career, he understands how rare of an opportunity it is, even to be in the second round with a chance to keep playing and then to lose, one of the stars of their team, the offensive engine in the playoffs at 9 goals in 8 games when he was playing to Nichushkin. You can understand there might be some frustration with that. That being said, and obviously I don't know the full nature of his situation, but addiction issues usually aren't so much a decision as something that almost like a disease. It's something that people can't kick. And so, part of that I just feel like is probably the emotion of the moment. They only found out the day of that game that it was happening to the Avalanche teammates. They're getting asked right after a loss to react by the reporters. And I think you see maybe some of that reflected in the answer, because I'm certainly not going to suggest that Johnson isn't a good teammate or something like that. But, it's tough. 2 years in a row in the playoffs. And this guy finds himself not playing for, reasons that aren't related to an injury or something. It's an issue in his personal life that obviously he hasn't been able to, get control of, for lack of a better word. Jared Bednar, the Avalanche coach, said, "We hope he finds peace." That kind of says it all. I mean, obviously this guy is waging some kind of war inside himself, and he's not been on the winning end of it. And stage 3 of that program that you referenced, we don't see a lot of players get to stage 3. Often, fortunately, stage 1 and stage 2 are about the limit, and usually players are able to get themselves back to a good spot. But stage 3 is 6 months without pay. And even then, only in mid-November can Nichushkin apply to be let back into the league. So that's obviously a very punitive, sentence for him. And, it kind of leaves some questions long-term future in Colorado up in the air to some degree. But certainly in the moment, it's put the team down one of their horses at a tough time.
Absolutely. With that being said, the fact that the Avalanche are still alive and they battled the way that they did against Dallas on Wednesday night, an impressive game by the Avs. Still thinking about that Arturi Lehkonen goal that beat the buzzer before the end of the first period, and the way that they were able to get some goals off in the third period. They led for the first time in this series in the third period. That is pretty incredible to see from this Avalanche team.
Yeah, and look, it's just win this time of year. That's what I was saying earlier. You don't want to be grading victories. I mean, you just find a way. Any team that ultimately lifts the cup, and certainly even any team that gets to the Final Four or down to the Cup final, usually has to battle through some things. I mean, it's just the nature of playing every other night for up to 2 months, how physical the games are, how big the willingness to sacrifice to win is. And, you got to win without some of your best players sometimes. And we've seen both Colorado do that on the ropes and Boston with the Marchand injury.
Yeah. All that to say, while I do admire what Colorado's been able to do, I still think Dallas wins this series. I think Florida wins their series. I don't see anyone coming back, but I'll say that Colorado has the best chance of coming back of all three teams. I think the
You're
Rangers close it
sleeping
out
on the
in six.
Canes, brother. You're sleeping on the Canes.
Well, you know what? I'm going to sleep real good. We could come back to this if the Canes actually come back and shock the world. You are in Prague for the World Championship, and you got to watch Austria nearly come back from a massive deficit against Team Canada. You wrote a good story on that. You spoke to Marco Rossi, who was on the Austrian team, about that, and he's going to remember that game for a long time. Take us through that game. Take us through the experience. Tell us everything.
Well, the scene is Tuesday in Prague. I'm fresh off an airplane, having not slept very much. And, you go to a Canada-Austria game. I felt duty-bound. Obviously, I'm here to work. But, it's 6-1 at the second intermission. And I tell you, I was this close to leaving the building because I was exhausted. And I didn't have any reason to believe that there was any kind of comeback in the offing. But, Austria gets a goal and early enough in the third. And they get another one pretty soon after. By the time they make it 6-4, there's roughly half a period left. And I got to say, the building was electric. I've been to a number of these World Championships over the years. Admittedly, it's been a long time, Julian. But I have my early takeaway from the Prague experience is it's unreal that they're packing this building. We're talking 16, 17,000 seats. I mean, it's basically an NHL-sized building, even for the games you wouldn't expect. I mean, the Czech games, of course, you would expect with so many people living here cheering for the home country that would be an easy sell. But Canada-Austria was jammed, and the momentum just went against Canada's way. And tough night in some ways for Jordan Binnington, certainly tough for his teammates too in front of him, the Canadian goalie, because they stopped playing. And one of the craziest things I ever saw is Austria turning a 6-1 deficit into a 6-6 tie, going to overtime in one period against Team Canada. And the crazy part about it actually is that, okay, this is the early stages of the tournament. There are upsets. Canada lost to Norway at last year's World Championship in the early stages and still won the gold medal. So, for a top country, you maybe don't always have your game together yet. You're still finding your way. But Canada played amazing through 40 minutes. They didn't leave any doubt in the game. There's no sort of idea or no sense that they were cheating. They were all trying to get points or anything. They were playing so disciplined, getting the puck deep, just doing the things you need to do. And all of a sudden, bam. And it's actually hard to articulate how unlikely this is. First of all, first time in tournament history, any team has come back from 5 goals down in a game. It's the Austria at any level of competition has never scored more than 2 against Canada in a game, ever, anywhere. And obviously to get 5 in a period. And, it's actually big for Austria. They end up losing in overtime on the first shift of OT. John Tavares scored for Canada, but they get a loser point for that. And they're one of the countries that will be fighting not to be relegated, to be sent down to the B pool next year. And even getting 1 point from Canada puts them in a pretty good spot, because you can imagine some of the other countries in their bracket that they're fighting against. Great Britain, for example, has already played Canada. They lost that game in regulation. I think you would expect that from the nations that are distant. So it was a weird feeling in the building, and it was especially weird seeing the Austrians, and I don't blame them. This is not a point of criticism, still being celebratory after the game because of what it meant. It's something their country has never even come close to accomplishing, and it ends up being a loss, but it felt like a small win for them. And I did start up Marco Rossi, who scored. He's the only NHL player on the team, only full-time current NHLer, and he scored the tying goal, and he said he's going to remember that game for 50 years. So, first of all, good on you, Marco, because you're only 22, and you can count on having 50 years to remember that. But secondly, of course, it was pretty neat. It really was cool being in the building and seeing that. And I just love sports. You never, as much as we all think we know what you're going to see, you just never quite know what you're going to see. And there's a lesson. I never leave a baseball game early, ever, for this reason. And I was this close, Julian. I was honestly, at one point, I was nodding off in the mix zone or the media tribune base. Because, I hadn't slept in 35 hours or something. But I'm glad I stayed, because I don't know if I'll remember it 50 years, but certainly in 10 years, I'll still remember that game. It was that unique.
So you don't rate gamers. I'm just thinking of people who might be listening and obviously want to know what it's like to be in your shoes and cover these games. You're obviously not necessarily writing a gamer. You wrote the story you wrote, which was more of a feature story. But as the game's unfolding and the Austrians are mounting the comeback, are you rooting for an outcome? Are you rooting for the Austrians to complete the comeback? Like, what's going through your head?
I was so spaced out in that moment. I definitely wasn't rooting for an outcome. Again, the whole jet lag thing, like I can't underline enough. I just was there sort of because I'm here and I thought it was important to be at the game, even if I wasn't intending to write anything. Of course, there's a lot of what I'm looking to do here is get players on feature angles to, react to maybe, you're right. I'm not covering the tournament. I'm not, I'm going to go to a game tonight. I'm not going to write a game story, but then when they do come back and you see it and you realize you're seeing something special or unusual, then I'm looking for a hook. And the hook arrives when Rossi scores. Until he scored in the last minute, I probably didn't have my hook because, I guess the result itself, no matter who scored, might have been it. But, the fact it's kind of a known player over in North America, someone who plays for the Wild, who, obviously a lot of interest at the Athletic and that particular team. And then just how monumental the comeback was. That secured it. So there's a rule, as you would know, in the press box. You can always cheer for your story. You're not necessarily cheering for a team. I wasn't even cheering for a story that night because I wasn't supposed to write one. But the story arrived at my feet, and I kind of had no choice.
I kind of like those games
Sure.
where you're just there and you're not expecting to do anything, and then something out of the ordinary happens, and then your brain starts racing, and you're like, well, I have to write off this. Like, something has to be done. I especially got to do that a lot in the last year here in Calgary. I love being in those situations because you're just relying on instinct. It's not a paint by number situation. You're just trying to make sense of what you're just about to witness or what you've witnessed and putting pen to paper or typing it out, and then it turns into a story. I love being in those moments.
Yeah, it's like I got a laptop and I'm not afraid to use it.
Yep.
I've
That's
got a
literally
tool.
how I take it.
I've got a tool here and I'm willing to wield it. And you're right. There's also, I think that there's some magic in it too. When you see something you weren't expecting or something that I even know potentially a reader out there who is not even caring about the World Championships, maybe certainly was not watching that game. There's enough you can take out of it and to contextualize it that I think might make worth clicking on a story and reading 700 words or whatever it ended up being on that game. And so, that was cool. It was not expected. And I hope I see more of it as the tournament goes along. I mean, we're still in the early stages where there's a lot of one-sided games to be happening here, but in the not too distant future, you're going to have Canada, Finland, Canada, Czech, and then get into the quarterfinals and the part of the tournament where the medals are awarded too.
One more thing about the World Championship. You mentioned the fact that the access to players, I've also heard this from other colleagues too, the access to players, very different compared to covering NHL teams on a day-to-day. Any fun stories, any fun scoops you've been able to get from some of the guys in the little bit of time you've been in Prague?
Not yet, too soon, but I will say I've seen a couple of NHL general managers here, a number of scouts that I know. I have a notion of where some stories will be, but I don't want to spoil the egg just yet before I've reported them out and got a chance to write them for the Athletic. But, it's a really neat event, I think, on two levels. I've actually had a chance too. A few people have stopped me, Canadians that are here, a couple fathers and sons that came over to watch the games. And it's a really cool event on the ground. Like it's a fun fan experience. I mean, right now, actually, I'm in the sort of a side room of the rink, but Team Finland's playing. I mean, the Finns travel like crazy to this tournament. And I saw them all out there this afternoon drinking beer and enjoying the sun and wearing all the gear with the face paint. Like it's really, you feel something. Like it's very different than the NHL. But I think that part is cool. And then, from the reporting end of my job, it's very valuable to rub arms with a lot of the people that are here because, basically there's only 8 teams playing still in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, there's 24 other teams that are already thinking about how they can get better. And one of the ways they can do it is watch games that are, played at a reasonably high level, watch players get over here and start planning for next year. And so it's a cool place to be. And I'm lucky the Athletic was willing to send me to watch.
Yeah, that's an awesome assignment.
I should say too, Connor Bedard, we didn't get to him, but we started the tournament.
He's been good.
Started the tournament with 5 goals in 3 games. And, for him, that's significant because, obviously the games aren't against the top competition yet, but this guy's auditioning on some level to be in part of the best on best tournaments in the next couple of years, whether it's the Four Nations face-off, potentially the 2026 Olympics. I mean, we might sit here and say it would be surprising not to see him at those, events just because of the trajectory his career started on and sort of the junior career he's had, but he's still got to prove something at the professional level. And it's funny, I asked Andre Trigny, the Canadian coach, basically every team Canada has got about 9 centers in the forward group. So there's always players that have to be shifted to the wing. I mean, that's just it's a embarrassment of riches Canada tends to have at every tournament like this. And I asked him why Bedard was put to the wing. And he said, one of the reasons is, let's face it, we know he wants to be part of those other events to come. And he's got to show, because he's a Team Canada winger in the next 2 years if he plays for one or both of those Team Canadas. And so it's an opportunity for him to show something. And so, there was that old commercial, every day is a tryout. I think when you're 18, even coming off the rookie season he had, he didn't get to play a lot of games in Chicago that meant anything this year. I mean, they meant something to him, but they didn't mean much in terms of there weren't playoff intensity. They were, the Blackhawks weren't at any point in a playoff race. These games, especially as the tournament goes long, the stakes are going to be high. To win a gold medal, you got to win 3 must-win games. You got to win 3 Game 7s in a row, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so, it's a chance for him to show his best. And so that's one of the things I'm most excited to keep watching as the tournament goes on, is just how he fares. And he really could not have got off to a better start. So he's got to be feeling confident, which is, always good for a player that's expected to produce offense.
You actually mentioned something interesting there, where it might be a surprise to people if Connor Bedard somehow doesn't end up on the Olympic team in 2026. Just kind of paraphrasing a little bit here. Doesn't history suggest that would actually be the expectation? Like, I'm thinking of Sidney Crosby when he got drafted and he wasn't on the 06 team, or Steven Stamkos when he was drafted, he wasn't on the 2010 team. 2 really talented young number 1 overall picks who showed that they would be deserving of playing on a national team if the team wasn't Team Canada and they weren't as stacked as they were. My expectation, I know there'll be a few more years in terms of the difference between now and 2026. I know we're kind of skipping the 4 Nations tournament, but bear with me here. My expectation is that Connor Bedard would be in tough, considering what the roster might look like, but maybe he still makes that roster. I could be wrong, but that's the expectation I would have.
I would guess he's on the team right now. Like,
sure,
all kinds of things can happen between then and now that change it. I don't want to even start listing them out loud because I'm not trying to jinx him or I'm not trying to put anything into the world. But like, he's got to remain productive. He's got to remain healthy. He's got to continue to grow his game. And we know how. Look, this guy is committed as they come. He's. Trigny said today he's 18 going on 25. Like he's very, very mature beyond his years and focused on becoming a great player. Team Canada whiffed on Sidney Crosby in 06. That was his rookie season.
They did.
So it's a little different. They had to make that call, I think December 27th or 28th, but basically Christmas time of his rookie year. So even as great as Sid was, he ended up having a 100-point rookie season. I can see in some ways how you err on the side of caution and miss there. I do think the approach changed. When you got to 2010, sure, Steven Stamkos didn't make it, but you had a pretty young Jonathan Toews, a young Drew Doughty. Those players were put on and ultimately played themselves into really meaningful roles on that team. I think there's less aversion now to young players, but that being said, no one's holding the door for him. He's still got to crack it open and keep it open. That's on him, and that's I would think that's a big part of why he's here. I haven't had a chance to have a real big in-depth conversation with Connor. I was part of a scrum with him the other night, but I would think he's here knowing that he still has to make an impression, that he wants to show them he matters to him to wear his country's colors and to be at a tournament like this. Like it's pretty unique. I actually was at Crosby's first Worlds, which was in 2006, after his rookie year. The captain of that team was Brendan Shanahan, so that just shows you how time folds on itself. Young Sidney Crosby was the star of the team, and older Brendan Shanahan was the veteran who was there trying to win a gold medal. They fell a little short of doing that. But, you have now some parallels. You have young Connor Bedard here and older John Tavares here trying to salvage something. He's not right at the end of his career, but he doesn't, I think he's probably at a stage where he appreciates that every year he can be healthy and performing, that they want him. This is a good thing for him. And so he's come over to try to play a small mentorship role as well. So, man, time it moves quickly is all I'm kind of getting at by sharing that. And I think Bedard will be there ultimately, but nothing is assured to him. And it's sort of like the very polar opposite of the Pettersson thing. Like if he played 3 or 4 games and hadn't scored yet, someone like me would be in that mix zone after the game saying, are you feeling the pressure? You have 15 shots, but you haven't. Like the nice thing when you score is, first of all the stories are positive. and secondly, is there's not a lot of focus on you. And I'll say this too, Julian. Again, in a day and a half or 2 days on the ground here, he's actually the player that's been the most under the microscope. Like it seems like the fans are most excited to see him. The foreign media, in particular, is like peppering him with weird questions and trying to get into his mind. And someone asked him if he'd been to a bar in Prague yet. I don't know if that's a reference to maybe a younger drinking age, or I don't know. I don't know what the intent of that question was, but point is he's a real focal point of this Canadian team, and kind of reminds me of what Sid was like in Riga all the way back in 2006. Him and Patrice Bergeron were two of the young members of that team, and they were getting tons of attention, and it was a chance for them to, kind of further bolster their careers, international careers, and it's an important time for Canadian players to do that because, and of U.S. players and, any country where you're in tough, because we actually have best on best coming again, which is got to pinch me. I didn't believe that we'd see that.
Yeah,
it's been a long time.
It's been way too long. I'm very excited at the idea of a true best on best. I know the Four Nations, it's more of an appetizer, but give me the real thing in 2026 when the Olympics come back. I'll be patient.
Fair enough, appetizer, but it's still going to be the best Canadian team you can build, the best U.S. team you can build, the best Swedish team you can build. Like, you're still getting four of the top nations in the world sending their best teams. I realize the stakes aren't quite the same, or not nearly the same as the Olympics, but I think it's going to be a more tasty appetizer than maybe you're giving it credit for.
That's very fair, and I'm still going to watch it anyway when it comes on. So that's a very fair point. Yes, again, as I was saying earlier, looking forward to more of your coverage at the World Championship, Siege. We should get to stick taps now. A bit of a tough transition here. And with respect to a few other nominees for this segment, like a guy like Connor Ingram, who won the Masterton this week after his time in the player assistance program, we have to talk about a massive loss in Canadian sports media. Darren Dutchyshen passed away, longtime TSN broadcaster, SportsCenter host. This was announced on Thursday morning by TSN. He was 57 years old. We know he had been battling cancer. This is a guy I grew up watching on SportsCenter, and so many Canadians across the country grew up watching him on SportsCenter, dating back to when he started, I believe, in the 90s with the network. And this is just a massive loss, and it's hard not to feel sad about this.
Oh, of course. I mean, first of all, condolences to his families. Obviously, to all my colleagues at TSN that have worked there even much longer than I have, that had even more of a personal relationship with Dutchy. But, the time I spent around him, I think you feel this loss because, people that are on a channel or maybe a show that if you love SportsCenter, they become kind of part of your family. They're in your family room with you, or your kitchen, or wherever you got your TV every day. And I can tell you what stands out to me about Dutchy is just how warm a guy he is. Obviously, he's a big man and, very buff guy, but like he was just such a generous spirit. And, I think what you saw is what you got with him. He was very genuine. And I think that connected with viewers. That's what made him great at his job. It's what made him so well known across the country. And obviously just the longevity he had in the position. He's someone that whether you met him or not, and, I know a lot of people had a chance to meet him over the years, you can't help but feel that loss. And so 57, what do you say? It's far, far too young. Very, very sad. And yeah, I mean, big stiff tap from us to everyone affected by that loss, and especially to Darren's family. And, I just hope you can find warmth in the memories over time here.
Absolutely. On behalf of everyone on the CJ Show and the SDPN, we rest in peace to Darren Dutchyshen. We send our best to his family. A bit of a sad note to end the show, but I'm glad that we were able to pay our respects that way. A long-time broadcaster in the industry in Canada, and he will be missed. Yeah, that's going to do
legend,
it for
man. People throw that term around, but he was a real legend.
He's a legend.
He embodied that.
He is an absolute legend. Okay, that's going to do it for our Thursday edition of the CJ Show. If you have questions for the Monday edition, get them in right now, whether on Twitter, on Discord. I don't think carrier pigeon will work unless you are able to send a pigeon out to Prague. CJ will be back on Monday. I will not. I will be on vacation.
Ooh.
Yeah.
We got a bonus host.
Yeah, as of now, I have no idea who the bonus host is going to be. So the host, I won't say he or she, they will be hosting the Monday show and the Thursday show next week. Or hey, maybe it'll be wild if you get like a guest host and then you have to do an emergency pod and then they have to do like a whole bunch of episodes. That's gonna be crazy.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoy your vacay, man. We'll miss you. It'll be weird to do it without you, but the show must go on. We'll be back with 2 episodes next week.
Nah, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
We're gonna get a fresh Julian McKenzie back though 2 weeks from now. So
oh man.
Refreshed.
Oh, I will be fresh as a daisy, monsieur. Anyways, subscribe to the show.
Fresh, so clean.
Oh, so fresh is so clean. Are you up on Outcast? I don't know. You're not a big rap guy, but I don't know if you're.
I know some
I don't know if
Outcast.
you're listening.
Yeah, I mean, I made the reference.
Okay, so you did mean that intentionally.
Yeah.
You were listening to Stankonia when you were in Coburg in the 9-9. All right. Oh man, I can't wait to hear what the banter is going to be like with you and insert guest host here next week. Anyway, subscribe to the podcast, and we'll be back on Monday. Peace, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.